Hello there. Welcome to this group meeting for ATTR 856. We are here to wrap up a discussion on a book that we've been reading. I have it here, Extreme Ownership, How the U.S. Navy SEALs Lead and Win. I'm here with a number of my colleagues, and we are all members of the Indiana State Doctorate of Athletic Training Program. My name is Brian Coulomb, and I will allow my colleagues to introduce themselves now.
My name is Devin Serrano.
My name is Caroline Woodgen.
My name is Ashley Crossway.
I'm Shannon Rowe.
I'm Kelly Brock.
And I'm Adam Kitchen.
And so tonight what we will be doing is reflecting on the book, how all the principles in the book impact our personal and professional lives, and then we will probably get into some actual situations that we are experiencing in clinical practice and how the book principles can apply to that. So at this point, we'll open it up for just some comments on how the book really kind of relates to our own lives, personal and professional.
Yeah, so the first thing I thought of when I was trying to put all these concepts together and how, since we've been trying to incorporate these already into both our clinical practice and just kind of thinking about it as we've gone through the book, I think overall using these concepts well and not just picking like one or two, like if you use all of them, really improves relationships in general, especially the ones that you may have struggled with in the past or new scenarios with maybe like those trouble athletes that you just can't quite communicate as well with. And I'm getting ahead of myself. That's more clinical practice. But I think overall, like relationships are going to be better because everyone's going to have differences of opinion at some point. Like not everyone gets along. Communication is going to be a whole lot better. A lot of this book is about communication, talking about leading up the chain of command. And so developing better relationships with people that may be above you in hierarchy or just older than you, more experienced, that sort of thing. So that's kind of where I saw myself improving overall if I use these concepts, and more so outside of the clinical practice setting.
Adam, I totally agree with you on communication. That's one of the things that hit me as well. And a lot of these concepts were things I've heard before. Yeah, but when I started seeing them applied in specific situations, and then I started reflecting on my own, it's I think everybody can do a better job of communication. That's one of the things that I kind of took, like, man, I need to do a better job of not only communicating to like down the chain, but up the chain, and just making sure that the things that I'm trying to accomplish are clear, and understanding that what, even though it makes sense in my head, it may not always make sense in everybody else's, and they may not understand. And so I think not only the communication, but the patience to understand that maybe I didn't explain that well. And I think, that's one of the things that I know I do both clinically and on a personal standpoint. I just start talking and expect people to stay with me. And that doesn't happen every time.
When I started to reflect on the entire book, what really stood out to me is how interconnected every single concept was. When I started reading, I didn't think it was going to be that connected, but for our individual reflections that we did, I was going through and taking notes on each chapter, and I struggled to remember what exactly happened just because a lot of the stuff is so similar. You can't practice the communicating up and down the chain if you're not practicing no bad teams, only bad leaders. So it's all interconnected, and that's really what stood out to me the most.
Probably one of the things, kind of jumping off of Caroline's, even though I'm not at Fort Benning anymore, this made me appreciate the structure of Fort Benning even more because of how interconnected all this is. This was specific to the Navy, but being able to reflect on my experiences at Fort Benning and seeing how all these things interconnected was really shocking. And looking at it moving forward, I'm really enjoying kind of piecing it all together in my new setting, and seeing how, yes, I came from that setting and now it's a completely different one, but seeing how all of these things completely connect. And the one line, I know it's like chapter 2 or 3, but that I keep holding on to is the idea of it's not what you preach, it's what you practice. And that concept has really resonated with me throughout, just because that applies to students, my workers, my coaches, everything. So that's the one concept that no matter what throughout this whole book has really resonated personally in my practice.
Yeah. The one that really hits home with me, it kind of goes back to the communication, is chapter 3, which is believe. Kind of like Brian said, is you can communicate something and it totally makes sense in your head, but if the people you're trying to communicate with, if they don't understand and they don't buy in, you know, they might not be passionate or dedicated. And it's not because, you know, they don't want to do it or they're trying to like go against you. It's just they don't understand the big picture. They don't understand the why. And I think that's a really important thing, especially with like my students and my coaches and stuff, is trying to get them to understand why I'm doing something and not simply seeing it as a change to the norm and, you know, like messing up the practices or messing up their thought. Is just getting them to, you know, to believe and buy in.
Yeah, I was gonna, kind of say the same thing. The believe chapter really stuck with me, but also the simple chapter. A lot of it is about keeping things simple. I'm one of those people where I kind of will overthink, not only like in clinical practice, but also in general life. I will overthink a lot of things and kind of take it probably further than what is intended to be, or get a little dramatic on things. My dad calls me a drama queen. So just like kind of remembering to take a step back, keeping it to the most simple like state possible, and then obtaining and accomplishing those goals one step at a time.
And I think for me, somebody already mentioned it before, just the no bad teams, only bad leaders. I think the story of Hell Week and the boat races will probably stick with me, maybe forever. And I think that, I hope that if I'm in a position of leadership in the future, like over, X amount of like employees, that I remember that, and remember that if, they are not succeeding, it's probably a reflection of myself as a leader rather than their performance necessarily.
I also had kind of one of those moments. I don't know if I would call it an aha moment, but I had one of those things that as I was reading, I think it was the chapter that was talking about leading up and down the chain. It may not be that exact chapter, but there was a number of scenarios I think it was in multiple chapters, where the authors were put in a situation where they had to do something that they just could not understand, and they just didn't realize why they were being forced to do this, that they disagreed with it, and they were really struggling with this. And the comment was made that they had to take a step back and try to see and really, it might have been the believe chapter, but kind of believe in the mission and look at. And what really struck me was the question was posed: why do you think the superior officers in this case were forcing them to do this? There's no way in heck that the goal of this was to make the mission fail. The officers were not trolled. That can't be their motivation. And that kind of hit me going, there's tons of stuff at TLU where I am, and I'm sure there's stuff where you guys are, where there's a new policy and now we're going to do it this way. Now we have to do this certain way. And there's so many times where I go, man, we're sitting around talking with coworkers and other people. I'm going, oh, this is so dumb. Why are we doing this? This is such a waste of time. This is so, whatever it is. And I'm thinking, with that perspective, it's an interesting perspective to go, well, wait, are they trying to just put unnecessary work on us and make this, make this and make patient care that bad? Hopefully not. And you would think, no, you would think that, all right, there's got to be a reason why. And so if I can't understand the reason why, or if I can't take a step back and go, this, and find out that reason, then it's on me actually to go and ask those questions. And I think that kind of relays over or kind of crosses over into the clinical world too, is that, people do things, they're not, hopefully the goal is not to make the patient care worse. We're not trying to harm our patients, but if we don't understand these procedures, then, so basically that kind of viewpoint really kind of hit me that, that's a good way to just step back and take a different, or a look back and go, there's got to be a reason. And what is that reason? If I can't find the reason, I'm just babbling now. So I'm going to let somebody else talk.
That I wanted to pop in because that sounds really similar to, and I can't remember if this is from the Crucial Conversations book or another book called Question Behind the Question, because a lot of these concepts overlap. Like what you're talking about sounds like seeking to understand before seeking to be understood. So like you're trying to just basically understand or interpret what the other side is trying to do, like what their intent is. So trying to get that established first before you start talking and saying like, well, I think this and I think this and blah, blah, blah. Like the thing that most people want to do when they have problems or issues, or they look at something and you don't understand it, you say, well, this isn't going to, like you were talking about, like, well, this is going to make patient care harder. And if this is going to have these consequences, and why don't they realize that this is going to make something worse? That's going backwards, or it's flip-flopping that situation. So that's one thing that I think I've taken out of previous leadership classes or just lessons. And again, and we see it again in this book, which I've never read, or I didn't hear about it until this year. And it's one of those really common concepts, I think, because it works.
I kind of just thought about how, like, Brian, when you were talking, it made me think of when we first started the program and we had our outcomes class, and Dr. was telling us about outcome measures, and all of us were like, what? You want us to do outcome measures? It's going to take so much time. It's going to be paper, and like that sounds like ridiculous. Why is that something that we would do? Like kind of everything that you were just saying, like someone implemented, hey, we're going to start using outcomes, and everyone was just kind of like, is that really something that we need to do? And like we all kind of like resisted it at first, and then we kind of learned more about it, learned about how it helps patients, like patient care. It helps us understand, and like, we learned all these amazing things about it, and then we're like, okay, we get it. Now we understand why this is something that we need to implement in our clinical practice. But definitely at first, I think all of us were a little more hesitant to use it. And now I freaking use it every single Monday on all my weekly patients. I'm like, okay, well, it worked.
And I feel like that goes straight back to the whole concept of extreme ownership, because if there's something that you don't understand, it's your responsibility to figure it out and to ask your supervisor or a coworker and find that meaning.
Yeah, I immediately, when you brought that up, it made me think of that big project we had to do where we had to present something to, players, stakeholders, coaches, and it just kind of ties it all back together. I know this semester I'm kind of seeing this is the big tie-in, like everything we've done, like outcomes and all that, tying it all back together to.
What about I think this was the last chapter, or one of the last chapters, and when the authors talked about the dichotomy of leadership, about having to balance all those things. And, Dr. Games really, liked that, and he read it on one of his videos. What did you guys think of those? I thought those were pretty powerful. Yeah, anyone?
I would agree. I think they're nice, like quick, they're easy to remember. So instead of trying to remember these full principles and like the examples, I think this is a nice, concise little passage to be able to remind yourself of some of the concepts and remind yourself of how to just simply maybe practice one thing a day. So like if you think of one of these short little passages and you go into your day and it gives you some motivation to be a better leader, that's kind of how I would use it.
Yeah, I thought it was, they were really good. But what got me afterwards is I had like, the light bulb moment, like it went off like, oh, wow, these are really great. But then when you think about it, like they're kind of common sense. Like you want to be good, but you don't want to be the best, or you don't want to be like arrogant about it. And when I like took the time to like sit down and actually think about it, I feel like they were all fairly, like common sense, like be aggressive but not be overbearing and things like that. Like, yeah, that makes sense. Like assert yourself, get your point across, but don't be a jerk about it. So I think they're really good and they're like realistic to life application.
And then it kind of, at the very end and the afterward, there it talks about how everything that they suggested is all simple, but like the easy things are hard to do. Like it's easy to do, like the things that you're not supposed to do, but it's actually like it's harder to do the easy, simple things. Like those are the ones that go a long way that people don't see. Those are the behind the curtains character type building things, but those are the ones that are going to really have you stand out as a leader.
Yeah, so I mean, to me, being in a leadership position myself, I took and I knew this already, and this is like you said, Ashley, this is stuff that I was already trying to do. I just hadn't written it down and made a conscious effort to say it. But the thing that really hit me was the being close but not too close. And as a program director, and being with students and being in the clinic and being in the relationships that you get to build, that's really what hit me, is that trying to be close, but there is a separation that has to go on and has to be there. Yeah, I'm seeing, and this may, I don't know, basically the other part was that a leader has nothing to prove, but everything to prove, because just my position as a leader, everybody sees me as the leader of this program, but then I also have, a duty and something to prove that I can do that I'm going to follow up and do, do some of these principles and kind of direct where the program goes and what we're trying to do. It always makes my wife laugh when she talks to our students and they say, "Man, Brian is so intimidating. I'm so scared. I can't talk to him." And she just laughs because like, "Brian, him? Intimidating? Oh, God, what are you thinking?" But is that inherent, like, oh, he's the leader, and so anyway, that's just mine. Any other before we get on to like the specific situations, any other comments on just how some of these principles kind of affected you or relate to you guys? Okay, so are there any specific, because we want to try to apply this in our specific, this is a clinical experience class, so what kind of specific clinical situations may be happening or just happened that maybe that we blame somebody else for, but now we take a different look and go, maybe I can have a different effect on it. Is there anybody who wants to have one of those?
Okay, so the first thing I thought of was communication. Like Adam said before, we can all fix that or improve upon that. So working with multiple clinicians and not being the number one person that all communication goes through, I usually will experience some type of gap in understanding someone's activity level or treatment with their rehab or whatever. So usually it'd be like, oh, well, so-and-so never told me that when they got updated, or the doctor didn't call me, or, the coach asked me, I don't know, I haven't been updated yet. Whereas, I can take ownership and say, I haven't asked, I haven't sought out the answer, I haven't checked in with my supervisor. I haven't even talked to the patient. So there's things that I can do to put the ownership on me rather than saying, oh, someone else didn't do their part to relay information to me.
I really tried to start simplifying the instructions I give to my patients, and both in the home exercise programs as well as specific rehab techniques that we're doing in the clinic while I'm there with them. Just because I'm working with a high school population, so their attention span's that of a goldfish, and I need to keep everything as low level as possible, but still accomplish what I need to accomplish. So instead of doing what was typical end of evaluation, so this is what I think, this is how we're going to get you back. Did you have any questions? Here's a home exercise program. Instead of doing that, I've toned it back, and after each thing I say, I'll ask them if they have any questions about that specifically. And then I'll make sure that I go through those exercises with the patient and ask them if they have more questions about any individual exercise that's on their plan. So again, going back to the whole simplicity chapter, just getting the same goal accomplished, but as easily as possible.
The one that really hits home for me in my clinical practice is prioritize and execute. I can make all the excuses in the world about being a solo clinician and, having to deal with so many athletes and so many different sports and talking with coaches and the nurse and the athletic director and all that. But at the end of the day, things need to get done. And, everything from the rehabs to the stuff we don't like to do, like document and stuff like that. So one of the ones that really hit home in my clinical practice is I try to go in, it kind of goes into the chapter about plan too, is with a plan, what needs to get done right away? What do I need to get done before I leave? And how am I going to execute it? And I mean, kind of like the book said, it's not getting caught up in the details, but planning for some of those variables. So I'm more productive and effective at what I'm doing. And instead of making the excuses like, oh, I don't have enough time today, or, oh, coach talked to me for 30 minutes, things like that. So those are definitely a couple of the ones that, I'm trying to implement into my clinical practice to just be better and accomplish more.
For me, mine was kind of similar to Kelly. So I'm newly into a multi-clinician team for where I'm at, and going from being the autonomous athletic trainer to now working with 3 other athletic trainers. I definitely see myself that I need to have ownership and improve on my communication skills, not
it's
knowing
8 o'clock.
Not only knowing not only knowing what's going on within the team of athletic trainers, but also knowing what's going on between other patients. So like, there's a time where I could have a patient that comes in, but they worked with another person the day before, like making sure that everyone's notes are up to date, or I need to make sure that my notes are really up to date in case they see another clinician the next day. So that way I'm keeping myself accountable to make sure that the patient's care is conveyed into the next athletic trainer.
For mine, I had written it down before we had started, and it was almost word for word what Kelly said. So blaming others at work or communicating about the status of athletes. And it's easy to get lost, I think, with the multiple, because we basically operate similarly with multiple clinicians for a single team. And it's really easy to get into little bubbles and work with certain people. And then it's really common for a coach to ask you about somebody else that you maybe had not been overseeing directly. And I think I've gotten better at, one, not saying or telling them, well, I don't know, because that's somebody else's problem. Like, go ask them. I'll probably say something like, well, I'll ask and I'll get back to you as fast as I can if they're not here in like the room, or like I'll get on my phone and look like I'm initiating some sort of thing, because we've had that's the perception that we've struggled with sometimes, or I think probably most people will. If people perceive that you're not trying, they get more upset than anything. So making it look like I'm like making an effort to find out and solve their problem, I think has helped out that issue a lot. And just talking more and like leading up the chain and down the chain. I couldn't remember exactly where it was in the book, but it talked about some scenarios where you're almost like over communicating, and that's how I like to think about it, and asking the right questions, so it doesn't sound like I have to know about everything all the time, because I don't. Just pertinent information for whatever is going on maybe that day, or maybe there's like a new athlete. This actually happened today, like a new athlete who just got a physical, and I had heard that there was a new athlete, but Brittany and Cody were handling his paperwork and getting him through that process before he could start practice. And then he comes up today and it's like, "Can I start practice?" And I look at him with, "What's your name again? Like, I don't even know you." "Oh yeah, I'm the new guy." And like, I have no idea. I'm gonna find out. So trying to anticipate those scenarios and ask about it sooner rather than later.
I definitely fall into the same struggles, I feel, in a sense, as Ashley, being the lone clinician at my site. And definitely prioritizing is the biggest thing, because there are definitely little tasks that I would have loved to have gotten done weeks ago, but things like insurance and documentation, take priority over, finishing up a couple of policies and things like that. So definitely prioritizing and then leading into execution, and kind of falling into the over communication. I have a lot of athletes who have never really been athletes before, so almost expecting them to be at the same level of understanding and how to be an athlete as compared to someone who's done it their entire lives. Sometimes I over communicate to them because they don't necessarily understand. So just understanding the different levels of my athletes and how to best communicate with them, I think is probably the biggest struggle in my clinic.
So here's something I'm kind of curious about. As everybody, we're hitting this communication thing pretty good about, communicating with other people. For those of you that are communicating with other clinicians, and like you're not aware of what they did, and so it's you just got to go and find that communication time, or go and read the note or ask the person. But that, to me, I'm thinking that requires the other people to practice good communication skills as well. How do we, what happens if they don't communicate very well? What happens if they're Adam or Kelly, when you're Shannon, all you guys all had the similar deal. What happens when you need to get information and the other person has not done it, or maybe they didn't write a good note, and or they're not available, or they're so basically, what's the extreme ownership responsibility in that situation? What do you guys think of that?
I think I immediately just thought about going back to the Believe chapter, where it's about communicating to, like, whether it's your cohort, colleagues, or to the people that you lead, communicating the policy or why you're doing this, so that way they understand how important it is to communicate, how important it is to keep your notes up to date, so that way they see the bigger picture in the long run. So that's just immediately what I thought of, was that communicating of why this is important and how this will impact the future.
Yeah, I think that, at least what I do in my clinical practice, if I notice that something's not done thoroughly enough, is, I will go to them and I'll ask what the current status is, or what they did the day before, and then they'll tell me, and then I'll politely ask them to add that in their note. I don't know. There's not really any talk about that in the book, so I don't know if that necessarily aligns with extreme ownership, but I feel like that is the most professional way to go about it, because you're not being passive aggressive about it, and you're not necessarily casting blame, but you're inquiring because you need to know, and then asking for them to finish the job that they, maybe didn't do correctly, without saying it that way.
I'm glad you brought this up, Brian, because I think these situations are the most frustrating that I've dealt with, because usually what happens is, like, say, like, there's no notes and there's like nothing, but this person needs instructions for practice or something, and you got nothing. So you have to spend more of your time figuring out their problem, like starting from scratch, and then using your clinical judgment to create a plan for them that makes sense, so that you're not jeopardizing the person's health and stuff. So in the past, when this has happened, I think since we have these weekly like track meetings, so we have these small meetings in addition to our larger staff meetings, and that's where we bring up most of our communication issues. And the way I would word it, I guess, is talking about the frustration I may have had at that point. Like, one, bringing up, like, basically, like Kelly said, asking that person politely if they're around, and if they're not around later, getting in contact with them and asking, like, hey, I noticed in the notes, or starting over and saying, so on Thursday, so-and-so came in and they were talking about how they needed modifications, yada, yada, yada. And I tried to put some stuff together, or research what their notes were, and try and make that decision since you weren't around. And I struggled because I was lacking a lot of information that I think could have been included. And then hopefully they get the idea that, oh, I screwed up. Most of the time, this is what happens. They'll say, oh, yep, I forgot to do the note last week when I did the full eval, and update it and blah, blah, blah. So, and then that's pretty much where it ends. And I think I don't know what would happen if that situation didn't happen, or if the person didn't realize that they made a mistake. I guess you got to keep trying, or maybe get more blunt about it sometimes. I mean, everybody knows people like that, or situations where that has to happen. Sometimes it just doesn't get across, and you've got to almost be rude, but not a huge jerk, because if it's too subtle, they may not get it. So, like, I need you to do these notes because it's really frustrating. Yeah, so that's what we've done, or how I've approached those situations. I don't like those.
I mean, that's a hard, the reason why I asked, because it's a difficult situation. I mean, it's a really touchy, especially you guys, if you're dealing with your own colleagues that you guys are friends with, and, you want to keep a good working relationship, or if you're working with even a superior that, it's hard to tell them, hey, you need to have better notes. And I saw this as the leading up the chain part. And that was in the book. It talked about, how delicate some of those conversations can be. And you guys, I was just curious to see what y'all do, because it can be tough, and it can be kind of a awkward conversation of going, hey, you need to document. We need to do this, and kind of doing that. I will say that it's not always like Adam, you mentioned, it's not always that nice where the person goes, oh yeah, I totally forgot, sorry man, and we'll take care of it. But when it is, those are those extra things that make a certain job or a certain place good to work at. And I can tell you, from my experience right now, I work with people that we are really close friends, and we can, we're all honest enough, and we don't have the egos and, the check your ego chapters. We don't have that I can go, look, Tim, dude, what are you doing here? Are you going to be an athletic trainer or what? And, he can take that, and we can all take those comments, and they're not given in, mean spirit, but we can handle that. And we can all realize, like, yeah, I need to do a better job of doing that. I'm sorry. And, we can stay on each other. And so those are the kind of things that, those are just kind of curious things that, I'm just curious if you guys had run into that.
Not that I've run into it, but when you talk about situations like that and things not getting better, it makes me think of the chapter about decisiveness and uncertainty, where in the business application, she just straight up fires both of the people, like if they're not buying into the team memo. And obviously none of us at Indiana State are in that power, but just in the future, like when people aren't really stepping up and being productive together, is to see somebody take the change or make the change for the better of the whole environment. And I just really love how she just said, you know what? Bye. You're both fired. Go elsewhere. That was my favorite chapter.
So I will say this, I will add one last little thing. As a program director, there are often times where I have student issues within a group, and certain students are really not conducive to a good environment in the program, and this happens from time to time, and I know you guys have probably experienced that, but I can tell you this: when I was an assistant athletic trainer, head athletic trainer, even a faculty member, my viewpoint from that standpoint was a lot different. It was like, man, get this person out. They are horrible. They're infecting everybody else. They're really bringing us down. Get rid of them. And I was always frustrated with the program director that we had, where they would drag their feet. I will tell you, being on the other side, it sucks. And I can see the bad, because you're dealing with a person here, and the times that I've had to, like you said, Ashley, fire somebody or basically, discontinue their involvement in our program. I hated that. I hate that. It was like, is there anything else that can come up that will delay this conversation? Is there, oh, it looks like it's raining outside. Guess we have to, do something else. It's a tough deal. You cannot prepare for that. It seems we're kind of getting to to a good ending point. Does anybody have any other situations that would be good to discuss at this point? So allowing for the internet delay, I still saw no microphones pop on. So this looks like a very good time to kind of wrap up the entire extreme ownership conversation. And I think to wrap up, I would like to just say one final thing, and that would be happy birthday, Ashley Crossway. And with that, we will, yay, clapping, quiet clapping. All right, we will now sign off. Bye, Dr. Games.